So because of the technical issues from the European Commission part, we will also have another speaker from the European Commission, and she needs a little bit of time to catch her breath before she is thrown into this. So we will do the recap now, and I will try to see if I can change this. Yes, wow. Low tech, so good sometimes. So I will do a little bit of a recap of the what the Web Accessibility Directive is about. So for all of you who know this by heart, you can now read your emails or take a coffee or think about what you're having for dinner. The coverage of the Web Accessibility Directive is clear. It's public sector, and then it's what's called bodies governed by public law. That is an interesting way of saying a simple thing or maybe a complex thing. But in many countries, at least like in the central and northern parts of Europe, this group of organizations is really, really large. So for example, from Sweden, where I am, we have less than 1,000 organizations that are true kind of core public sector, what you think about when you talk about public sector, the national agencies, the regional agencies, and the municipalities and so on, the local level. But when we talk about the bodies governed by public law, which means that they are funded by taxpayers' money, and more than 50% also run by or managed by people with or the government's or taxpayers' money. That means that we have at least 8,000 of those organizations. So kind of the gray zone around the public sector body, that's really large. And I think that is one thing that makes it kind of the impact of the directive bigger than was maybe some people thought in the beginning, because this could be even private or not-for-profit organizations that run businesses on behalf of the government. And these organizations mostly, this is generalizing of course, but they hadn't had that much experience with accessibility from before. So we have really moved quite a few organizations into at least awareness and making sure that they are starting the journey of accessibility. When it comes to the what, so what is covered? Well, that's the websites, extranets, intranets, apps, and documents for the public sector body websites. So it's quite a clear scope here for what is covered. And I'm sorry for everyone working in public sector that I chose an image showing public sector with a lot of documents. I know that sounds, it may look very kind of old-fashioned, but that is still how I envision working at a public sector office is. And we will talk about documents later on today. The enforcement is really interesting and quite unique. So we have the monitoring bodies kind of top down, so the controlling mechanism is, but the monitoring bodies at national level, they do not only monitoring how the public sector bodies are doing, they are also providing support and facilitating training. So they are not the police, they are the firefighters, they are really helping, and they are doing actually a very good job, and I know really trying to make sure that they support and not only kind of complain about things that doesn't happen in the right way. The monitoring bodies also report back to the Commission. So the monitoring happens every year. The reporting back to the Commission happens every third year. In the middle of the pyramid, we have the public sector bodies and bodies governed by public law, meaning all the organizations that are in scope of the legislation. They need to self-declare their level of accessibility in an accessibility statement. And sometimes we hear that this is completely useless and it makes no sense and they could lie and so on and so forth. But the idea of this self-declaration piece is that the organization actually needs to understand their level of accessibility. So this is a way of making them aware and making sure that they look inwards to what they're doing. Our experience is not that they are deliberately lying. They may do some strange claims sometimes, but most of the public sector bodies really try to declare their level of accessibility. And this is important not only for the monitoring agencies, but also for end users. What many organizations tend to forget is that the accessibility statement is made for two target audiences. So it should not just be a list of EN requirements that are not fulfilled. It should not be a technical document. This should be written for users, for end users, to make sure that they understand where they may encounter problems. There's no reason to try to reach this service because it's not yet accessible. We're working on it. And then you can have the technical documentation made for legal reasons and for the monitoring body. You can have that in an attachment, that's fine. But don't scare off the end users with technical blah blah, because nobody is going to be happy about that. And the third part is the bottom-up approach. So the feedback mechanism that Alejandro talked about. And to me, this is really what makes the whole thing work when it works. It doesn't work in all member states, and it definitely doesn't work on all levels. But when the end users have time and energy and the opportunity to provide feedback, if they want to, it's not their responsibility, but if they would like to, it may empower the users, and it also can really make a difference when the public sector bodies in scope of the directive understands the real user needs. So it's not just that this is a law, somebody's telling me to do this, but there's a person behind this request. That is usually what starts things moving in the right direction. So the feedback can really be a gift, and feedback can really be crucial to make the enforcement work. When all these three pillars work together, then we have a really good enforcement. If the communication between the end user and the public sector body doesn't work out the way the end user would like to, if my problem is not solved, or if I do not get a response in due time, then there is also an escalation possibility. So I, as a user, have the possibility to raise a complaints. And that works a little different in different member states, but it could be the complaints is posted to the monitoring agency or another enforcement body, an ombudsman, or other. I've learned yesterday that it's even more complicated in Italy or Poland, and works otherwise in the Netherlands and so on. So there are different details, but there is an escalation possibility here where you can also complain. And then that becomes a vehicle for the monitoring agency to work on, either to monitor, to control that this is being handled in the right way, but also the complaints can be used as a way of looking at, okay, this sector really has problem, or these kinds of features of the websites is often what people complain about. That can also help them to make sure what they should focus their training and support on, or what they should monitor more, or focus the monitoring on the next year. The implementation of this legislation, well, it was enforced in 2016. It was transposed, like all directives are. It's a minimum harmonization directive. That means that it was transposed into national legislation after the enforcement. And then in 2018, it was applied in all member states. So that means that it really, starts happening and starts working on the ground. And then in 2019, we had a grace period, of course, of 1 year. So in 2019, new websites, meaning published after application in 2018, had to be accessible. And in 2020, existing websites had to be accessible. And in 2021, the apps had to be accessible. And I didn't write 23rd of September before all of these bullets because I think we are celebrating an anniversary, and it has to do with this date. The apps was in June for logical reasons. Then after 2021, after 21, we have had the monitoring, and also we are now in the second reporting period right now. Yes, there are some things that are not in scope of this legislation. That is public broadcasting and non-governmental organizations, and that is because for the public broadcasting, it's because there's other accessibility legislation. So legal people don't want them to overlap. That creates confusion. And for NGOs, of course, it's mostly a matter of economic means. There's also an opt-out possibility for member states, so where the directive says that you may include or may opt out on schools, kindergartens, and nurseries. And this is something that is often discussed. How can schools be taken out of the legislation? But it's not the whole digital footprint of the school, because there is an exception to the exception, which means that you need to have the essential administrative functions of the school, kindergarten and nursery, accessible, even if you have chosen to take it out of the legislation. And there are differences between the different member states, as always with these directives. There are also some exceptions. So, for example, live video doesn't have to be captioned or made accessible. But if you record the video and publish it online, then it's seen as pre-recorded. So even if it was a live video from the start, it's going to be seen as a pre-recorded video after 14 days. So you have 14 days to make it accessible. And of course, we get a lot of questions about this. So who wants to see the news 2 weeks afterwards? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And I can tend to agree on that. But when this directive was negotiated and created, there was nothing like the auto captions and all this technology that we see today. It was seen as too resource demanding to also require live captions and so on live video. I personally think that this may change in the years to come, because here we see a technical evolution that is really going fast. There is also an exception for online maps, but if the map is supposed to be used for navigation, then you need to provide an alternative. So you can explain how to find your way to the whatever municipal service that you are looking for, the garbage or something like that. Then you don't need to have a physical map for that, but you can explain it in text or in other ways, have alternative ways that are accessible, because online maps are really, really hard to make accessible. It's kind of very resource demanding again, and even if you do everything that's in the book, many people with disabilities will have difficulties reading and understanding the map. Third-party content is also excluded, and that is of course because the public sector body cannot be responsible for what other people write. So this is not third-party technology, it's third-party content. So that is also a misunderstanding sometimes. Cultural heritage reproductions are also excluded, because when you weigh between how important it is to save our cultural heritage for the next generations and how much it would cost to also make those reproductions accessible, we said, okay, the decision was that the reproduction was more important as of today, and hopefully technology will help us to also be able to make this accessible in a feasible way in the future. There have also been some exceptions based on timing, and I need to communicate with the tech people that my slides come and go. It's sometimes very black, which means that I don't really know what I'm doing. So documents published before the application of the directive are not covered unless they are needed for administrative tasks. So if any of the public sector body has hidden the instruction to a really important service in a PDF document, then they would need to make it accessible, even if it was published before the law was applied. Archives that are not updated after 2019 are excluded, and content of extranets and intranets that are published before 2019 are also excluded, but only until they are substantially revised. So that is just making it a kind of a more smooth, a stepwise move towards accessibility for intranets and extranets. Pre-recorded video published before 2020 is also excluded. So the whole idea with excluding things that happened before is to make sure that we don't spend too much time and effort on kind of looking backwards, but really making sure that we're doing good things moving forward. I think that's a reasonable way of making legislation. And yes, Alejandro already said this, but I was involved in the review of the directive, and there is a report published on that, and we do see even more improvements being made, not only from that review, but also for the reporting and the continuous work we do together with the monitoring agencies. And of course, there's still more to be done, but I think we can be quite proud of the Web Accessibility Directive so far. Yes, the the last slide was if there is a connection between the Web Accessibility Directive and the European Accessibility Act, and those are two different animals. The Act is not an extension, it's not a widening of the scope, they're two different laws. So where the Web Accessibility Directive covers public sector websites and apps, and the minimum requirements are presented in the EN 301/549 version 321 Annex A. Sorry for the long blah blah. The Accessibility Act covers, the scope here is economic operators, no matter if there is the manufacturer, the distributor, the importer, the whole ecosystem until you provide your product or service to the market. All of those economic operators, no matter if they are private or public or whatever, are covered. But it's only certain products and services. That's a long list of things, including bank services and e-commerce and so on. And the presumed conformance of the Accessibility Act will be stated in the updated 301/549 that we are working on right now, and we will talk about the standards and requirements in a bit. But there are also several other standards to go with the Accessibility Act. So they're really two different laws, and they have different scope and different minimum requirements, but they're all kind of aiming for the same thing, a better world for people with disabilities. So I hope that was my last one. Yes, celebration. So I just had some fireworks. Thanks for listening. And now I think we can leave the floor to the European Commission. June or you?